Happy to introduce Ryszard Rudnicki. I hope I said it correctly.
Ryszard Rudnicki, yes.
Okay, who's from the Institute of Mathematics at Polish Academy of Sciences. And he's going to be talking about semi-group of operators in cell cycle model, sorry. So please.
Thank you very much for your introduction. So as I mentioned here that I am from the Institute of Mathematics, Polish Academy of Sciences, but the institute is placed mainly in Warsaw, the capital of Poland, but it has some branches in other places in Poland, and one branch is in Katowice. It's a very small branch. Here is a photo of Katowice. You see there is the Katowice is the center, the capital of some industry region, but this photo, you look at this nice building, is a sport and entertainment hall in Katowice, a very nice one. And my institute is somewhere on the right-hand side, my office, I can say that. So you should go from this place, like here, to the right. And you will be just in 5 minutes in my office. Well, I would like to say something at the beginning about biology, but not too much. I know that you are a mathematician and you are not especially interested in this subject, but I should say that nowadays biology is the most inspiring science in mathematics. In fact, if you look at the number of PhD in the United States, for example, about 20% of PhD in mathematics are connected with biology. It's in biomathematics, so it's a big subject. It is why, because biology provides us a lot of different interesting mathematical problems. The models in biology are completely different than the model in physics. So it's a new subject for mathematics. Well, what is cell cycle? Probably some of you know this notion. This is very important one. It's a series of events which take place in a cell leading to its replication. Well, and this is a very complex process, and it is regulated by some protein interaction. You know that life is a protein system. All life is connected with proteins. But there are some models which describe the cell cycle process. I take here a typical model when we have 4 phases. Here, the first phase is when a cell is growing, and this phase is has a random length, and then there are 3 phases when the process of division of cells begins. So there is a description of these phases. In the first C, we have DNA synthesis, then we have protein synthesis, and finally we have mitosis when the cell is divided. There is also a possibility that a cell is going outside of the cell cycle and stop growing. A lot of cells behave in such a way. For example, in nearly all tissue cells, there are cells where are stop cell cycle process. Okay, so there are 2 things. One is network of protein interaction. The second is cell cycle. Well, if you want to study network of protein interaction, we can describe it in many possible ways. Here is some example. You see several numbers of differential equations it's very difficult to study them mathematically. So I will not talking about this at this moment. The second thing is, say, the process of cell cycle. I mean, these phases of cell cycle. And the description of such a process is we can describe this process by using the notion of maturity. Maturity is a position, a cell in a cell cycle. Cells live in a completely different way than human race. Humans have age. Age is, if you have people which have the same age, they are very similar in maturity. But in cell, you can imagine that some cells have the same age, but they are completely in different stage of maturity. So it's one description is by maturity, and the second, simpler, is by the size of cells. For example, if you consider rod shapes cells that are like that, then we can measure in a very simple way the size of a cell is length. Okay, and some models of the cell cycle which describe the maturity or size appears a lot of years ago. I started from a very simple model by Bell Anderson, but I will show you that it can lead to interesting semigroup, completely non-trivial. You can imagine that the cell maturity grows according to some differential equation. It will be useful for me if I denote the solution of this equation by pt of x0. X0 is the initial state of x. So pt of x0 is the size or maturity at time t. I also assume in this model that a cell split with some intensity. So P of x is a probability of splitting of a cell in a unit time. And after splitting into two daughter cells, we obtain a new maturity. The daughter cells has a maturity h of x. So it's a function of maturity of the mother cell at the moment of division. And if you consider the distribution, is not probabilistic distribution, but if you consider the number of cells with a given maturity, x, at time t, then you satisfy the following equation. You see is a partial differential equation and two terms on the right-hand side. One is non-local one. This is non-local. And what is here very important, that the function p of x is not bounded. If x is from some interval, then p of x is not bounded in the interval. If x, for example, we assume that the maximum maturity is 1, then p of x at 1 goes to infinity. So we cannot use simple perturbation theorem because these two operators are not bounded. Well, we should, if you want to prove some asymptotic properties, then, or even generate a semigroup, there is a problem at the very, very beginning. The next example is two-phase model, because as I said before, there are many models which are connected with phases of cell cycle. And we have two phases. The first one, when the cell is growing, and the length of the cell is a random variable. So we don't know exactly how much time takes a cell to grow. So the cell is growing with some probability, with some speed. G has the same meaning as in the previous model. And P of X now is the intensity of going from the first phase to the second one. So there is a picture how a cell is growing. It is growing in the first phase, then it goes to the second phase, then it is growing, and here we have division to two daughter cells. It has a maturity at this moment, and so on and so on. And this model is more complex, but we finally goes to the following differential equation, partial differential equation, but we have delay here with time and a similar situation as in the previous model. So another interesting kind of semi-group can be created here and started. We can also consider some two-phase model described by the system of two PhD with two boundary conditions. So it's another approach to this model. But there is a problem, very big biological problem, and we should create such mathematics which could be useful for biologists, not only for us. And for example, if you have some experiment with cells, then we can observe something. For example, it's not difficult to measure the length of a cell cycle. So the time between the beginning of the life of a cell and the division. We can measure this, and we can calculate what is the distribution of this time, the cell length. And we can measure also the size of the cell at the beginning. And we should create such a model which describe these notions, because in this way we can compare this model with a result which follows from this model with existing data. So I go to such a model. In this model, X is the size of the cell. So after division, if X is the size of the mother cell, after division, we have a size of the daughter cell is half of the size of the mother cell. The function Q, which depends on the initial size of the cell, describe density distribution of a cell length. So it's a density, probability density, which describes the probability that the length of a cell cycle is greater than A. Well, there should be capital A here, sorry, a mistake. So this is this integral. So probability that L is greater than capital A is this integral. It is called also survival function. It's as in a human population, we can calculate how long we can live using survival function. Well, and there is some simple relation between mother and daughter cell. If XB is the size of the mother cell, then this term without this one is the size of the mother cell at the moment of division, assuming that A is the length of the cell cycle, so 1/2 is the size of the daughter cells. Well, we should take some assumption, because it is impossible to do mathematics without assumption. And I will skip them here, but only explain this assumption on these two pictures. One is concerning the function Q. Q is a continuous function, which is exactly positive in the area here. So if, for example, XB is an initial size of the cell, then we should go here vertically, and this segment is exactly the segment where Q is positive. And the second assumption is concerning the relation between mother and daughter cells. This assumption means only that if you have a mother cell, then the daughter cell can have the size below the size of the mother cell and up the mother cell. So the diagonal lies in this area. Well, now we should create some model which describe the distribution of cells according to their size. In this model, we have two factors. One is growth of the cells, and the second is division. And the division process describes some relation between size of mother cells and the daughter cells. As we assume that the cells split at HA. Then the relation between the distribution of mother cell, the density of distribution of mother cells and daughter cell is given by some Frobenius-Perron operator P. It's easier to look at Koopman operator. It's a symmetric thing. You see, we have a substitution. XB is a size of a mother cell. This is the size of the daughter cell. So it's a Koopman operator, and then we can go back to Frobenius-Perron operator, and this is a real formula for this Frobenius-Perron operator. And now, if you know this formula, then we can find the number of cells which we can obtain after the splitting of mother cells. We introduce the function P is Q over phi is intensity of splitting of a cell, and if U function U describes the number of cells having some initial size XB and HA, then the number of newborn cell per unit time is given by this formula. So we simply integrate this with respect to A and multiply by 2 because its cell is divided into 2 daughter cells. Well, in this way, we obtain a system of partial differential equation as very similar to that in the previous model. But we have two variables. It's a really problem here. And we have some boundary condition like that. And I have explained why we have such a boundary condition and some initial condition. Well, now we can go to some main results concerning this model. It's a very simple formulation that is not easy to prove it. We consider a space L1 of X, where X is the set of possible size, initial size of cells, and initial and age of the cell. So age is changing from 0 to maximal age. And we defined U of t of xBr as this U of txBr. In this way, we obtain a function from L1 to L1. And the main result is the theorem about asynchronous exponential growth. Well, what does it mean? That this is a definition of asynchronous exponential growth. We can consider in literature different definition also. But assumption is only one. If g of 2x is different than 2g of x, then we have such a formula. What it does mean? That if we go to infinity, then the distribution of cells according to these two variables is given by some function v. Here is a coefficient. This coefficient is simply obtained as a linear functional of initial value. And lambda is the rate of growth of the whole population. This is a very important property, because if we prove such a property, we can study what can be V. And in a usual model, when the cell live in a constant condition, usually we observe cells in this asymptotic distribution. So if you have this asymptotic distribution, then we can check if it's in some connection with data, real data. Now I would like to say something about the proof of this result. First of all, I have made some substitution, very simple one. Z is U over phi, and then we obtain a system of very similar at the previous one, but it has two things. On the right-hand side, we have 0, but more important is for us that we have Q here, not P. And why it's we want to have such a thing? Because P is not bounded, but Q is bounded. In this way, we obtain an evolution equation. We can write it as evolution equation Z prime of T equals some operator ZT. This operator is, we should put it on the right-hand side, so it's minus F, the partial derivative with respect to A. And the domain, a function from A, which has derivative from A because we want to have this also. And we have boundary condition, exactly that one. So it's a right-hand side, but here we should have a trace operator because you have 0 here. So in the space L1, we should define the value at 0. So it's a trace operator. The trace operator is well defined on the space Sobolev space, like here, and with such a norm. So the first thing is that we need to generate a semigroup. So we have the following proposition. The operator A with this domain is a generator of a positive semigroup on the space E. Well, and the proof is not difficult, but it's based on very interesting result by Gwisz and Marta Tranka-Miskal, also people from my group. Some perturbation method related to boundary condition and unbounded perturbation in Ly space. The second thing, which is technically rather advanced in my opinion, is to prove that a joint operator of A has an eigenvalue with some eigenfunction which is estimated from above and below by such a thing. And there are some steps in proving of this proposition. First of all, we should identify the domain of this operator. Then the second thing, we check that this operator have a positive eigenfunction corresponding to some eigenvalue lambda. If some integral operator, I do not define it here, on this space has a positive fixed point. The problem usually is with integral operators, linear integral operators, that we are able to prove the existence of positive eigenvectors, not fixed points. So, but we have some choice because this operator depends on lambda. So we should find one lambda such that this operator has a fixed point. So the problem of finding a proper lambda here. And the second proposition, if you prove previous one, then the second proposition is much simpler, that the operator A also has eigenfunction, positive eigenfunction, but for this exactly lambda. Then we change the scheme. We replace our semigroup TT by new semigroup by this formula, but also change the space. We change the Lebesgue measure to new measure, which connected with the eigenvector of the adjoint semigroup. In this way, we obtain something which can be called a stochastic semigroup. I will give a definition of stochastic semigroup after a moment, but it was also in the talk of Katarzyna. Well, and then the next steps are following. First of all, it's completely clear that this eigenfunction is also an invariant density of this semigroup, and we should check the convergence here to this invariant density. And finally, we go back from this semigroup to the semigroup TT and obtain this result concerning asynchronous exponential growth. Well, in this conference, on the second talk, as I remember, there was another definition of stochastic semigroup is completely different. In our definition, we have no stochasticity in the semigroup. That does not mean that semigroup is stochastic in the sense that it's random in some way, but it comes from some random description. Well, what is stochastic semigroup? We recall that we have some set of densities here, positive and with norm 1, and linear operator which preserves densities is called stochastic. Also, another name is Markov, but Markov also appears also in other contexts. And stochastic semigroup is simply a C0 semigroup of stochastic operators. And we use the following simpler result. We use some result here. We called semigroup asymptotically stable if it converges to some invariant function. So if you start from any density, we have convergence to invariant density. And so it's a stability in the sense of Lyapunov, asymptotic stability in the sense of Lyapunov in the set of densities. And so the result is concerning with partial integrals. So semigroup is partial integral, is estimated from below by some kernel, some integral operator, non-trivial integral operator. And the result which we use is that if we have partial integral semigroup and it has a unique invariant density and this density is positive, then this semigroup is asymptotically stable. Well, we use this theorem, and so we need to prove that this semigroup is partially integral. The proof is technical, but
you have 2 minutes remaining. Sorry for the interruption. 2 minutes, okay. Yes.
So I will go. Oh, it's practically the end of my talk. I will hear some theorem about Dyson-Phillips expansion theorem, and in this way I checked that it's a partial integral. Some remarks. We can consider also a model which we have H size structure model. So not X is not a beginning of the size, but X can be size of the cell and is a model like that. And we can prove also AG condition. The second thing, if G of X of 2X equals to G of X, so we assume that for some X it's not true, but if then this semigroup is irreducible, but have the following property that we take two functions, non-negative function, different from 0, that the action of these two functions is completely different, is this product is zero for all time. And last thing, first of all, this methodology can be applied to other models without particularly any change. And the second thing, one of such a model can be stochastic growth of x. So instead of differential equation, x prime equals g of x, we have a stochastic differential equation. And we can also aim to prove this condition, HGD. But what is interesting here, that if we are able to create a semigroup for the initial size and age, but we don't have a semigroup for X and A, for size and A. So we are not able to define a semigroup for these two things, but we are able to prove asymptotic behavior here using this method. And this is the end of my talk. It's some picture from, say, the place where is our meeting, just in internet. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your interesting talk. Any questions? Well, if not, then let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.